One of the groups of people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed us and He guided us, one such people that will be given space under the shade of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, رَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّا فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَ عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَ عَلَيْهِ. The only reason why you and I are sitting here is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. اجتماعنا لله وتفرقنا لله. So we make dua and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us that space. The second point, before we begin anything, is that we should be cognizant of what is happening right now as we are speaking, as we are sitting. This is a hadith which you have all heard many a times, that when a people come together in the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they learn the Qur'an, they teach the Qur'an, the lessons of the Qur'an, the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the angels and the malaika of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throng around us. So I'm not quoting this hadith because you haven't heard it before, you don't know of it before, but this hadith I'm mentioning to us, and why I'm reminding us, is that sometimes we become oblivious and we forget of what is happening at the moment. At a time where people are very not present, so to say. This is such a time where people are not present. People don't seem to understand what is happening around them, the reality of the situation that they are in. This, in certain terms, we call this ghafla, obliviousness, heedlessness. The opposite of that is dhikr, being aware. Tadakkur is also from that. Allāmah Yusuf bin Nuri rahimahullah. I heard this from a teacher of mine, who is actually the son of, I heard this from Muhammad Sahib Abbas Umar, who is the son of Harun Sahib Abbas Umar rahimahullah, who was a direct student of Allāmah bin Nuri Sahib. So Allāmah bin Nuri Sahib, one thing he used to do is that between Asr and Maghrib, he would sit, especially on Fridays, and he would just say Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. So once someone asked him that you're just sitting here and saying Ameen, 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 what is the wisdom, what's the reason behind this? So I want to show the point I want to make is how present the awliya Allah are, how aware they are of what is happening. So he said that yes, as it comes in the hadith, that this is the time where the malaika, they change their shifts and they make dua at this time as well. So he's saying, I am saying Ameen to the dua of the malaika. How present and how aware. So this hadith we've heard many a times, but we should be aware and remember and remind ourselves that this is something which is happening around us, that the malaika are here, that this is a reality that they are seeing here, that they will go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will give a report. This is one of the problems that we face nowadays, that it's easier to get someone's attention, not if you're there with them. How often do we see that 6 people are sitting together, but not a single person is communicating with the person that's sitting in front of him? Rather, they are all on their phone. It's easier to get someone through their phone and texting than to sit next to them. So many times we will be speaking to someone, we ask them something, they put you on tab. They heard you, they put you on tab. How you do it? After they're done with it, then they turn to yes. Is that not true? We're all guilty of this one time or another. So to come out of that and to become aware, to become present, this is our topic that's been given, is the essence of Salah. Is that correct? This is one of the preconditions of Salah, that a person has to become aware, hudurul qalb, to be present. This was the second point. The third point, and I'll inshallah begin with this, is that once a person came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's a Sahabi, obviously. He sees Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he meets him, and he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as many a times we do to our seniors, to those who we hold in high esteem, and they are people of knowledge. Obviously, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's absolutely no comparison. So he asked Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "ዒdni ya Rasulullah wa awjiz." He says, "Oh Rasulullah, please give me some wa'adh and advice." ዒdh from wa'adh or nasiha, some advice. But he adds a condition, which in his dictionary, or what that condition means to him and what that condition means to us, are actually two different things almost. He says, "ዒdh wa awjiz." He says, "Ya Rasulullah, give me advice, but keep it short." Keep it short. So now one is that you tell some Mawanas here, Shaykh, please speak for a few minutes, but keep it short. Right? So two questions come up. One is, if you and I are to meet Rasulullah, what would we do? You would make him speak and speak and speak. We wouldn't say keep it short. We just want to hear more and more and more. And secondly, when you and I say, if we tell someone keep it short, for example, right now I asked Hafidh Ragid that how long is expected, so it's half hour, 35 minutes. That's normal. It's pretty normal here if you're asked to give a bayan. And yeah, if you drove half an hour, does it make sense that you come here and speak to us for 2-3 minutes? Hadha Jabir radiallahu anhu, Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu anhu. There are 7 such Sahaba radiallahu anhum who are called Mukthirun min al-Sahaba. In the field of hadith, they're called Mukthirun min al-Sahaba, or Ashabul Uluf. The 7 such Sahaba who narrated more than 1,000 riwayat and a hadith from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Anyone know these names? Ashabul Uluf. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, Aisha anha, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu, and Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu anhu. So Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu anhu, once he hears a hadith attributed to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, someone informs him of this, he's in Medina Munawwarah, and he is told that such and such Sahabi heard it from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And that Sahabi is in Sham, in Syria, Levant. Jabir radiallahu anhu had not heard this directly from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So he, as it comes in the tariq, in the history, even if I recall, Imam Bukhari, if I recall, Ghaliban, in Ta'liqan, he also mentions this, or he alludes to this at least. That he takes his conveyance and he goes on a travel of 1 month's journey to Sham. And he gets there and he knocks on the door. He is asked from inside, "Who is this?" He is told that Jabir radiallahu anhu, the Sahabi comes out, he hugs him. He says, "Did you hear this such and such hadith from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ جُرْدًا مُرْدًا." And he says yes, and then he narrates the entire hadith to him. And once he hears this hadith, he starts getting back on his conveyance. So they ask him that, "You just came all the way from Medina, one hadith?" He said, "That's it. I just wanted to hear it directly from you because you heard from Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam." So if I end the ban here right now, it's not too bad. I spoke more than what Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu anhu heard from the other Sahabi. So this Sahabi asked Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Ta'idh wa awjiz," that please advise me. And then he says, "Awjiz," keep it short. So the second question that we have is, why would you say keep it short to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam? You might as well make him speak and speak and speak. The more you take. So this clause, this condition, the Sahabi put, or he asked Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, obviously in a polite manner, this speaks volumes regarding the temperament of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. This one statement speaks volumes regarding how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were trained by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, Ya Rasulullah, tell me something, keep it short, that although it may be one or two things, I want to put it into practice. My objective isn't just merely to amass more and more and more knowledge, that I know a lot now, and that it ends over there. Rather, I ask you one thing, two things, three things. You'll tell me that, I can practice upon it, and that will be of benefit to me. This will be considered ilm nafi' and beneficial knowledge for me. And if I find out and I've learned and none of that is put into practice, then what is the objective of that? Once Mufti Rashid Ahmad Sahib Ludhiani rahimahullah, many of you probably heard of his name, Sahib Ahsan al-Fatawa. His Ahsan al-Fatawa is in 10 volumes. Many Darul Iftas require students to read that. So once at the end of his bayan, he used to give bayan as well in his masjid. So at the end of the bayan, at the end of the speech, someone came to him and says that, Hazrat, that through your bayan, a lot of my, he uses a word and I'll translate it inshallah. He says, Hamari ma'lumat mein bahut izafa hua. Ma'lumat. From ilm, ma'lum means what you know. So he said, because of your bayan, mashallah, I gained a lot of ilm or knowledge, information, if you want to call it knowledge, ma'lum. And then he ended it. That was his comment. So Mufti Rashid Ahmad Sahib Islahan told him that I would like to hear that you tell me that because of this, hamari ma'mulat mein kitna izafa hua. Ma'loom to ma'mul, amal. Ma'lumat is from ilm. Ma'mul is from amal. So he said, I would like to hear from you that you say that because of this bayan or all of these bayanat that you've been hearing, how much has your amal and your practice increased? That you hear bayans and bayans and bayans. Out of all of that, how much amal and practice has come to you? So this Sahabi radiallahu anhu asked Rasulullah, the reason why he tells him to keep it short is because he is more interested in putting that knowledge into practice. That what Rasulullah advice and wa'ad he will give me, I want to make sure that's put into practice. Because one is ilmun li and the other is ilmun alayhi. Ilmun lak, the other is ilm alayk. One is knowledge which is beneficial for a person and it becomes helpful to him in his life and his hereafter. And the other is that knowledge which actually becomes a burden for him. That's why the masnoon, the ma'thur du'a that we recite and we should be reading, Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a wa a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa'. That Allah, I ask you of beneficial knowledge, that knowledge which I put into practice. And I seek protection from that knowledge which is non-beneficial, meaning that I do not put that into practice. So it doesn't become hujjah alayh. It doesn't become a proof against me. So Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he advises the Sahabi radiallahu anhu and he says, the first advice he gives him, he says, Salli salata muwaddi'. Salli salata muwaddi'. The second advice, وَلَا تُكَلِّمْ بِكَلَامٍ تَعْتَذِرُ مِنْهُ غَدًا. And the third advice, وَاجْمَعِ الْيَأْسِ فِي مَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ يُحِبُّكَ النَّاسِ. First advice he gives him, that when you perform salah, perform your salah in such a way as if you are bidding farewell. When someone who is bidding farewell, if you know that you're leaving this world, that with your second salam, Malakul Maut is there, he's waiting for you, what kind of salah would you pray? That should be your endeavor and your goal of how I should be performing salah. Salli salata muwaddi'in. That perform salah in such a manner as if you are going to leave the world tomorrow. So this is the reason of our ijtima', of our gathering. What are we? The essence of salah, that by understanding the reality of salah, the objective of salah, what is expected from a person, that hopefully and inshallah, and we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us tawfiq to perform salat al-muwaddi'. So let's listen to whatever has to be said with this intention, that whatever we learn, whatever point, and something that may be of interest to you, and whatever that may be, how can I channel this towards putting that into practice? That I will be able to perform my salah in this way, moving forward. That I will make an intention from moving forward, that I will practice and I'll put whatever I hear into practice. So Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam tells the Sahabi radhiyallahu anhu that this should be the quality of your salah. So how does a person get to that? In the tafsir of Iqāmatul Salah and establishing Salah, which we hear again and again, we've heard that the Qur'ān Kareem tells us الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ, or that أقيم الصلاة, establish Salah. So establishing Salah versus merely performing Salah, there's a big difference between the two. Iqāmatul Salah starts from before the Salah. The very first point that we should keep in mind, and that will help a person in this regard, is that we should understand what does Salah mean for us. What is the status of Salah for us? We recite Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The all praises for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Rabb, the Lord of the universe. What does Rabb mean? What does it mean to be a Rabb? We translate as Lord. So we hear of this word tarbiyah, nurturing, meaning that being who brings something from its very initial stages, that brings it all the way to its kamal and to its completion. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that all of the universe, Allah is the Rabb of all of these things. Whether those things that we know of, those things we do not know of, you and I included. So what is the tarbiyah for us? For us as insan, for us as human beings, when we hear of Rabbul Alameen, usually we think of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has facilitated our birth into this world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the womb of the mother, the stages that a person, the embryonic stages that a person goes through, that he comes into this world, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us with various systems in our bodies, respiratory system and digestive systems, and all these things we speak about. Usually our mind only goes to the physical aspect of the human being. The physical bodies that we have, usually we connect the idea of Rabb and tarbiyah with only that. But the essence of insan, the essence of human being is what? Is it this physical body? It's something beyond that, it's more important, which is the ruh, the soul of a person. When the mayyit, a person passes away, what do we see? The mayyit is here, the body is here. They don't say brother Zayd is here, brother Bakr is over here. They say the body is here. When the ruh is no longer there, then it's no longer Zayd, it's not Abdullah, it's not Muhammad. So the essence of insan is ruh. So what is the tarbiyah of the ruh? How has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala done that for us? So that is by legislating the tashri' of ibadat and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very important point to understand. That just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided food, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. So when we hear rizquha, what comes to our mind? What we're going to eat after this dinner, this program. That's also rizq, definitely. But there's a ruhani and a spiritual rizq, which is the essence of a human being. So how will that be fulfilled? How is that fulfilled? That is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislating, making it farad, obligating upon us the ibadat, the various ibadat that we have, and out of all of them, ra'sul ibadat, and the pillar of our deen, as-salah, prayer. We need to shift our understanding, flip the paradigm. that Salah is not a mere obligation. Salah is not a mere obligation. Rather, Salah is a need for human beings. It's a human need to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as it's our need to breathe. Oxygen is a need, water is a need, food is a need, clothing, shelter, these are all needs that we understand to be needs for the physical self. The reality of Salah for us, it's not a mere obligation. Shaykh Muhaddith Dihlawi rahimahullah, in his Hujjatullah al-Baligha, in the beginning, in the earlier sections of the Muqaddimat, he discusses that what is the reality of Sharia. This is very important for Muslims living in the West. Shaykh wrote it at a point where this book is written at a point where theosophy becomes a very important discussion. This is in British India, where people are being affected by various isms and ideologies. So this is a very relevant book. Understanding it is a separate issue, and learning it. But the idea that's there of theosophy, it's a very important subject and point for a person to understand. That how do you understand legislation in Sharia? That is the example of Sharia. He says is the example of Sharia such that, for example, a king or someone who has someone under him, someone who is a subordinate, they're commanded that, just randomly pick up one thing, put it there, pick up the second thing, put it somewhere else. There's no meaning behind it. They're just being told to do random things, and there's nothing which comes together. There's no real objective behind it. There's various things just for the, so to say, for the heck of it, this is prohibited, that's prohibited. One thing has been obligated, the other thing we're saying it's preferable. Is that the reason for Sharia? Is that what the essence of Sharia is? Or is it something more? That the essence, the objective of Sharia is, or the example of it is, that the king, he commands his slave that make sure you do such and such work. Why? Because there is certain benefit for you. Make sure you consume such foods, because if you don't, you won't have energy and you won't be able to do your work. And make sure you stay away from this poison. Why? Because this will harm yourself, etc., etc. He says the example of Sharia is the second. That it's not mere randomness, just for the sake of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just told you, make sure you 5 times to keep you busy, because you might be getting bored in this world, therefore you should be praying Salah. No. Just for the sake of it, certain things have been prohibited. You cannot eat this. Why? Just to make sure you don't enjoy this world too much. No. So the essence of Salah, the reality of Salah, is that it's a human need. This is the very first point that we should understand. As-salatu imadu din. Or al-Miftāḥu al-jannati as-salah. That the key of Jannah is Salah. A hadith upon hadith that we know about the importance of Salah. But because the human being has been created لِيَعْبُدُونَ, so that he worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he has in himself this nature of abdiyah, of being a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of being an abd. So either he will apply that abdiyah, that servitude, towards the one who is supposed to be served, or he will put it towards some other avenue, whether he accepts it and understands it or not. So someone will put his forehead in front of monkeys and cows. Someone else puts it in front of idols. Another person says, no, I'm an atheist, I don't do it anyway. So what does he make his abd? The entire world and his own nafs. That whatever his nafs and his self commands him and wants him to do, he'll make sure he'll go to any length to make sure he fulfills that. And what does he call that? He says, I'm living a fulfilling life. What does he say? I'm living a fulfilling life. Meaning that he's fulfilled or wants to fulfill everything that he wants to do. The Qur'an al-Kareem says that these are people who've made their ahwa and their desires, their ilah, their God, their deity. Because every human being must be an abd. It's in your DNA. There has to be expressed in one way or the other. So either it gets expressed through salah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through fulfilling the other ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that have been legislated, or they get fulfilled in different forms and manners without the person even realizing. And the person who serves at the highest level, this becomes a mark of honor for him. In Surah Al-Isra, the 15th juz, سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى حفظه الله. That we know of the incident of the Isra and Mi'raj. So the incident of Isra where Rasulullah travels from Mecca Mukarramah to al-Aqsa, and from there to the heavens. So anyone can understand that this is a very honorable position. This is a huge honor for the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that he is being brought to the heavens. So when we honor someone, we put very fulfilling or very nice titles, honorifics. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use for the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over here? For Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, what is used over here? Which quality? Sayyidul Mursaleen, Sayyidul Anbiya, Tajul Medina. Out of all of the alqab and the positions that he could have been called by, the Qur'an al-Kareem says, Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi, with his slave. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings his slave over here. So the question may be that this is a place to be honored. And the Qur'an and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling the Rasul abd over here, which he is obviously. But why over here is he also being called an abd? It's because the greatest honor, the greatest title a person or any entity, any being can have, is that it does the job that it has been created for. If a car doesn't get you from point A to point B, it doesn't matter how nice the interior is, it's not worth being called a car. You can have the best phone and you can have the best camera and everything, but if you can't make a call with it, what's the point of the phone? So like in the same manner, the human being who has been created lil-abdiyah, for servitude, if you don't serve your creator, it doesn't matter all the titles that you have, all the things you may have achieved, all the things that you may have earned, all of that will be put to one side. The question is, how much of an abd have you become? How much of an abd have you become? And this is where the discussion of salah and concentration and dedication and the essence of salah will start at this point. That when a person realizes and understands who is he standing in front of, and what is my connection with that being? Where do I stand? Where does he stand? In this world, everything we say is about nisbah and connection and relationship. Depending on a person's connection and relationship to things, the status of that changes. How you speak to your father is one way. How you speak to your friends is a different way. How a person speaks to his mother is in one way. How he speaks to his spouse is in a different way. How he addresses his teachers versus his classmates. When a person understands where do I stand and where does this person stand, even in the corporate world. Even in the corporate world, it's the same. One person is the manager, other is the supervisor, someone is the CEO, one person is the employee. There is a place for everyone. Where do we stand? Where is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? As makhlooq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the khaliq, This is where the discussion should start. If this point is understood, that what is my reality and what is my connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where do I stand, then the rest will become salat muwaddi'. Then khushu' falls in its place, khudu' falls in focus and concentration and humility and humbleness and concentration. Why? Because we understand how, if we're being addressed by the CEO, then a person is paying attention. You don't need to give him a prep talk to make sure that you're not lying down when you walk into the CEO's office. Don't put your feet on top of the desk. The CEO can have his feet up the entire time whilst he's speaking to you. But you can't tell him. This is the same thing the Qur'an Karim says, لا يُسَلُ عَمَّا يَفْعَلُ وَهُمْ يُسَلُونَ. He gets to ask you, why weren't you here on time? You can't say, hey, I saw you parking 5 minutes after we all had to come. When the police pulls a person over, you understand where that person is, where you are standing. If a person is being called to speak to a person of a very high position in the government, they realize, they understand what there are certain protocols. So it's an idea that the point is, the moment a person understands, where do I stand, who am I, and who am I standing in front of? Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he says there are 6 steps and 6 points a person should keep in mind. Number 1, hudurul qalb. That leave everything behind when you come for salah. And that's one of the benefits. That's one of the benefits of coming to the masjid for men for salah and dedicating a place for salah in the home for women. That once you demarcate that this place is for such and such thing, then the quality also changes. So now, many of you perhaps know work from home versus when you go into the office. Now, although work from home has its benefits, but everyone understands and knows that the amount of time a person takes, the amount of breaks it takes, quality of work, when you're dedicated, you're in one place, versus someone's calling you here, hey, do the laundry, do this, answer this phone call, change this child's diaper and that. It becomes 2 different things. So one hikmah and one wisdom and benefit of salah in jama'ah, when a person says, I will come to the masjid for salah in jama'ah, is that he leaves everything behind. Amalan. In practice, he leaves everything behind and he now comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this purpose. So this is very mu'athir and effective in achieving this objective of hudur al-qalb. That a person ignores everything else. He puts everything behind himself and he says, I will be present. We spoke about being present. There's a presence over here. The second is tafahum, to understand what a person is saying. That we understand what we are reciting. So mashallah, I see there are many students here, whether they be students of Ḥifẓ or the alim class. And there are those surahs that we recite again and again, Surah Fatiha for example. So we should try to understand the meaning of these ayat, of these verses, those surahs which we recite more often. The third is ta'zeem. The third is ta'zeem. That a person understands who he is standing from, the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the grandeur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaykh Waliullah, we mentioned his name earlier. Shaykh Waliullah says the reality of salah is this as well. That the person, when he understands who he is standing in front of, see, this is the culture that we live in today is called the selfie culture, I call it. Selfie culture. What's a selfie culture? It's not just limited to a picture that a person takes of himself. That's just a manifestation of a certain culture. That a person is more interested in himself, the self, me. We refer to it as ananiyyah in Arabic. Al-Qalb call it ananiyyah, of me. In Arabic, inshallah, you have students of Ḥifẓ over here. When the word ana comes in, The word ana itself is written hamza, noon, and alif. Noon, alif. So you don't read it ana. When the word ana comes, it's hamza written, hamza, noon, alif. They write it like that. So one hikmah they say is that in ana, there's a prolonging. The word I should be kept short. Ana, that's it. It's done. I'm just using it as a pronoun. Otherwise, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. The Quran rhetorically asks human beings as a genus, that was there not a time لم يكن شيئا مذكورا, the human race wasn't even something mentioned. You weren't even something mentioned. One is that something was and then it's no longer there. So you speak about, oh, we had this and we knew of this, so you can remember it. But imagine something which was non-mentioned at all. Nothing. Non-existent. Not even just non-existent, but there was no mention of it even. I mean, that is your reality. And then the Quran Kareem explains the embryonic stages and how a person comes to being. This very weak and feeble person. But the same person, now he's making tawaf of Baytullah and the phone is here. Because the culture the person lives in, it's all about me, fulfilling my desire, fulfilling life. Make sure nothing is left. Do everything and everything that you want to do. That's what the selfie culture. Salah breaks that. Salah starts with the ta'zeem of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, we call it the tahrima. We call it the tahrima. That we make everything else haram on ourselves except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do for the next few moments. For the next few minutes, they're solely dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Why should I ignore everything else? I ignore my work, I ignore my family, I put everything else behind, it doesn't matter, my food, everything is out. All of that is haram now. Why? Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest. Nothing is worth giving my time to except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This time is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't matter who is calling me, I won't answer their call. This is for Allah, Allahu Akbar. Whether it be my needs, my wants, my hawaj, none of that. So when a person understands this, then automatically the takbir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he understands the ta'zeem of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then automatically the takbir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes out of his heart. And now how will he praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the best way to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those through the kalamullah itself. So standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in awe and respect. That's what we do even amongst people. That when you respect someone, when the teacher walks in, for example, then you stand up, you give your place. When someone of status, they come in, you don't just lay down, lay back, this person walking up. You stand up in attention. So in qiyam, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. That stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dedicating yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now, how do I praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what do I recite? The kalamullah itself. Because there's nothing more pure than that. My words will not fulfill the haqq and the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's only the kalamullah which is, and the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is appropriate to be recited in the ta'zeem of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in mentioning the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have the qira'ah, whether we understand it or not. In both tafahum, we said that's definitely something which helps in the concentration and something we should endeavor for. But whilst a person doesn't know it, he still recites that. Because that still has the strongest effect. Understanding the meaning of something is not a condition for that to have an effect. Words have an effect. And whether a person understands those words or not, it's not necessary in order for a person to have that effect. For example, this is just for example, people listen to certain music and sounds, etc. Or even if it's not music, you listen to certain sounds. If you hear the chirping of a bird, if you hear the chirping of a bird, it brings what we call nashat into a person. People listen to music, why do they? They listen to their sound. Even if there's no lyrics, why are they listening to them? It has a certain effect on them. Whatever effect they want, and it has a certain effect on them. So the kalamullah, which is the sifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, undoubtedly that will have an effect on a person. So a person stands and he recites the tilawah of the Qur'ān al-Kareem. There's no clock in front of me. How much time do we have left? It's been half an hour? I read the hadith, but I'm not practicing. ዒظ وأوجز. To keep it short. It's 5 minutes, inshallah. We can wrap up. So in qiyam, then qira'ah, then a person, he does khudu' and he goes down and says the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ruku'. So bows down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showing that he has nothing. And eventually the person comes down to sajda, where Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Da aqrabu ma yakunu al-'abdu min rabbih wa huwa sajid." The closest a person is to his Lord is whilst he is in the state of sujood. أقرب ما يكون العبد من ربه وهو ساجد. The person puts the most honorable part of his body, his face, where all of his senses come together, his aql, his rationale, his other senses are there. A person puts that in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showing the utmost ability, the utmost level of humility that he has in his ability to show to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first sajda, ulama say, is to fulfill i'timaran, fulfilling the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Qur'an says, wasjud, that perform sajda, and come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by performing this sajda. So to fulfill that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which shaitan, iblis did not, insan and human beings, we fulfill that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Muslimin. And the second sajda is to show the shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this tawfiq. The first sajda to show, to practice and to fulfill the command, and the second one to show the shukr and gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After the sajda is done, a person has fulfilled this ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells his abd, his slave, to now sit and make du'a to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his qa'dah. So the adab and the etiquettes of du'a, as we understand from the sunnah, is we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. At-tahiyyatu lillahi, was-salawatu, wat-tayyibat, all praise for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Was-salawat, all of my physical worship is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All pure things, all of my monetary ibadah, all of that's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then salah ala nabi to attract the mercy, and then we end with the du'a. Why? Because the ibadah is not for Allah, so it doesn't benefit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's nothing which increases in the grandeur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by our ibadah. It's for us. So we end with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in the salah also he keeps that, you end with this dua for yourself. Make this dua for yourself. So this being an ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our words and our understanding cannot encompass the reality of this. We make dua, as we said in the beginning, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq to better our ibadah, to better our salah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us more concentration in our salah. If we perform our salah as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam advised this sahabi, that salli salata muwaddi', then we will see that the promises which come in the Qur'an and Sunnah, that inna salah tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar, salah prevents a person from all obscenities and wrongs. The salah becomes a means of drawing the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of gaining victory. Then we will see all of these things happening. But if we come into salah haphazardly, with obliviousness, rushing through it, then the objective of salah, or the highest forms of and objectives of salah, those will not be fulfilled. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.